everybody. This is James Diboe on Discovering Season 3, and we got a special guest in the house today. We got the Black Men's Group in, and Chase Johnson Lynch. How you doing, Patrick Graham? How you doing, Jay Blades? How you doing, Chase Johnson Lynch?
What's up?
Good to see you. Yeah, well, this is a special today anyway, and the reason it's a dedication into brother Runoko Rashidi, Dr. Runoko Rashidi. I consider him as a grandmaster, just like Dr. Ben, Dr. John Edgar Clark, and many more. And today we're going to discuss on his life. You know, he's born 1954, August the 16th, and he passed August the 2nd, 2021. And this is a person, a big influence on my life and all the work I've done around the world, visiting indigenous peoples. Also as well, the conscious on African history. And obviously Patrick Graham was with me on when he was in both events, the first and the second. Patrick gave him a lift back to the station. You know, these are great memories that we all have. And Chase got to see him on the Zoom. Yeah. And obviously Jay Blades, obviously, you know, you might be not aware who Runoko Rashidi is, but this is a real giant of a legend.
Yeah, that's the thing. I know the name. I know who he is. I just don't know a lot about his history and all of those types of things. It's the same with a lot of people. It's, you know, he's a big name, so he can't just be unknown. You know what I mean?
Okay. Well,
so I'm here to learn from you guys, basically, and get more information.
Well, what I think is good about that, Jay, is that, like, I had no clue as who he was as well. I mean, being here for several years, I've actually met Runoko before. James had him at the Caribbean Center because, like, as such a giant, you know, he's come to Liverpool over many years and everything. I remember there was a time with Slavery Remembrance. That he came and did a talk and stuff like that, and we're educating people about, like, reparations and all that kind of thing. Yeah. But also too is here on our program here, Discovering, we did a big Zoom with Runoko where we got to actually hear from the man himself, you know, and see various different adventures that he is taking part in, and so it was a very eye-opening experience for me, which I hope that it would be for you and for all those watching, because there's so many different stories he has, and you can't encapsulate them in a short period of time, but we just want to keep alive how important Runoko was, and especially for us being involved in the Liverpool Black Men's Group. You know, when the news just came out last week that he passed, and he passed doing what he does best. He passed in Egypt, you know, and everything, educating people and stuff. There was a lot of pictures that were on social media and everything, and so I just thought that it would really be good, you know, to revisit him with the man himself, James Diboe.
Most definitely, yeah. And I'm going to start with Patrick Graham now, because Patrick's, you know, he's met Runoko Rashidi twice, and you know, he has his own. He studied himself just like I've studied him. So we can start with you, Patrick, and tell us a bit about Runoko Rashidi.
Well, again, rest in peace, the great man. It was a real shock, because just before he passed, a few days before, he'd posted saying that he was off on another one of his guided tours that he does in Egypt, and, you know, literally 2-3 days after arriving, he's tragically died out there, which, although it's tragic that he's died, it was certainly fitting that he died in a place like Egypt or Kemet or any of the other older names that you want to apply to it. He enjoyed travelling to Egypt. I think he'd been there at least maybe 6 times or more. Yeah. He'd made several journeys over the years. You know, that was one of dozens of places he'd been around the world, because he dedicated most of his life to explaining and exploring the black presence throughout history, throughout many places where they've lived or ruled or reigned within the world, you know, from the obvious places like Egypt and parts of North Africa, Ethiopia to Sudan and so forth, to places where people would, you know, the general populace wouldn't associate that there's a black presence, not just in antiquity, but right up to this present day. You know, quite a substantial black presence throughout Pacific Islands, throughout the Philippines, throughout Malaysia, places like India. You know, so many different places, just people just wouldn't envisage. He spends his time, because what we've got to look at when you're talking about Runoko Rashidi, one of the things he concentrated on was the fact that we've all been raised, I know I certainly was, we've been raised with that myth that Africa has no history, no writing, and very little of nothing, other than
no
people
importance.
running around
Yeah.
semi-naked and living in huts and so forth. They've got no history of astrology, of mathematics, of medicine, of science, all these different things, of literature, of art, of architecture, all these things that they're saying they have no history of. Truth be known, they have a magnificent history of. Cultures that are revered in the West, like the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, they actually revered the African cultures, Egypt in particular, they held them in great reverence and great esteem, and effectively worshipped a lot of the gods that they did, and the names changed over time, as we've known. And Runoko Rashidi was basically a champion of saying, well, okay, in order to challenge that myth that black people have no history, have no knowledge of all these different things, architecture, science, mathematics, astronomy, and so on. He said, well, the evidence of all this actually still exists in Africa itself, but a large part of it exists in the looting and the pillaging that took place by many European nations, and the artifacts that they looted and pillaged that actually prove this rich history in architecture, science, medicine, mathematics, and so forth, is in these museums in many different forms, in the people who the statues and figureheads that are showcased in them. So he's authored and edited up to 18 books. He would have done many papers over the years. You know, I've just made a note of one or two books, just, you know, in case people want to look them up. But there's African Presence in Early Asia, which is actually a book by a man called Ivan van Sertima, who, again, Runoko Rashidi followed in the footsteps of this man and looked up to him. He was one of his, you know, in some ways, he was almost an understudy at times to van Sertima, and you know, and he helped him, you know, progress his career and his research and so forth. And he edited that book. That was released in 85, and I think a second edition came out in 1987. A very good read. Another book which is actually a really good read is Uncovering the African Past, and that's basically Uncovering the African Past with a subtitle, the Ivan van Sertima Papers. And although I haven't read that actual book, because it's entitled the Ivan van Sertima Papers, I've read many books by Ivan van Sertima, so I know the contents of that book and what it discusses. And it's such a rich and vibrant history that he explores and talks about. And, you know, a great book what he's wrote is one called My Global Journey in Search of the African Presence. And then there's another one which is called Assata Garvey and Me, and that'll be Assata Shakur, who's the mother of the late Tupac. Marcus Mosiah Garvey, of course, great African Pan-African leader, and obviously himself, and that book is aimed at children.
Wow.
and talks about a lot of the journeys that he's done around the world and opens them up to a lot of the discoveries that he's made. But, you know, I'll talk a bit more about you know, some of the things and the images that he highlights in various museums around the world.
Yeah. So James, you know, like in your talks with him, I remember that there was a significant piece of historical statues that he talks a lot about, which are the Olmec heads.
Olmec, yeah.
Now, I mean, like, can you just say a little bit about the Olmec heads? Because, like, a lot of people can identify the African features in the faces of the Olmec heads, but they were treated like gods in various different countries and stuff like that. So could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, it starts off with Ivan van Sertima. This is the person who mentored Runoko Rashidi. One of his main mentors. He had other mentors, of course. Now, van Sertima, he done a book. They came before Columbus, and it's a very interesting piece of work. Now, Runoko Rashidi, obviously, he's a lot younger than Ivan. Now, what he ended up doing, because Ivan was like the global African presence, but he even said himself, I've never been to Asia. So when Runoko was going into Asia and discovering the African presence there, now van Sertima probably read about these things. There's books like Chancellor Williams, The Destruction of the Black Civilization. He'll mention about Africans in China and different places in the world and that. Now, what he ended up doing is he took Ivan van Sertima's work and elevated it even more globally. Australia, the Pacific Islands, and I witnessed all this work as well. Now, when we're dealing with the Olmecs, now I've studied it from many different angles, and I think Runoko Rashidi explains it the best. He explains it the best because he has actually excavated every single Olmec head. Van Sertima done so many. He is the first black man to excavate every single Olmec head. So that was that's history in itself. Also, Runoko Rashidi, when he's talking about the Olmecs, he's explaining, yeah, well, you can see the Africoid features, but then you got to look at other things. He's an anthropologist. He deals with DNA. So we know about an Australasian Pacific Islander presence in the Americas. Black people I'm talking about, not like your typical what you see these days in Polynesia, but I'm talking about like people like Papua New Guinea. There's got that DNA there. It was called Lucia, found in Brazil. So we know about, so what is believed to be that the people who come from the Pacific, black people, these were the Olmecs, but the people who they built the statues of were depicting the Africans because they would come back and forth on ships from West Africa or the Nile Valley.
Now, let me stop you there, because this was one of the fascinating things about listening to your show. You said about the ships coming from West Africa, like Mali, right? So even though when we talk about, and we've always bandied around the name Mansa Musa, what people don't get right is that Mansa Musa may indeed be the richest man of Mali, but it was his brother, Abu Bakr, who actually sailed on ships. They built 3 ships. Took a whole community of West Africans, and they traveled for them across the water, never to be seen again, because they never returned. So the question really is, and now this was like, what century was this? 13th century?
Yeah, about 1300s, something.
So where did they go, and where did they end up? So now when we have the world populated, like Cuba, Haiti, the New World, Brazil, all these other places, these are places where you see these Olmec heads. Right? So isn't it possible?
The Olmecs in Mexico.
Yeah, I know.
But there's other depictions. You could go to Peru and you can see depictions there. You could go to Brazil.
Right. This is my point. Is that these Africans from West Africa had traveled. We're talking about I don't know how many people were on 3 ships. That it was like about 300 people. Right?
Easily.
Am I right? Easily. So they traveled, never came home, but they populated the world out there and everything. And then we got these Olmec heads.
Could I just come in?
Go for it.
In relation to that.
Let me just quickly, and then come quickly in. Just from what Runoko Rashidi explained about that, he said that because you've got people in America who want to claim indigenous American ancestry, and sometimes it can be to avoid your Africanness. So you got to be careful with that, you see. Do you know what I mean? So how Runoko Rashidi explained that is that the people who came over, whether it was Mansa Musa or it was the Nile Valley,
Abu Bakr.
So there's only small portions of people compared to the population that was in America at the time. So if you see, like in China, for example, you got billions of people. Now they come out of the Mongoloid race. Now that's a huge race that went into America, Southeast Asia, and conquered all the black people originally. So that's basically, so we have become the minority, whether the indigenous black people or whether they came from Africa. The ones who came from Africa would be not large numbers. We can't try and imagine them act like it was the whole country. You know, we've got to be realistic about it, and that's why I did like Runoko Rashidi when he explained that. It was pockets of people, so they're going to get the new people, the new wave of Mongoloid that was coming in was overpopulating the indigenous black people who were originally there, like Lucia, and that's why now. But then you got Christopher Columbus, who spotted black people. So let's not go on to them. But
what does Patrick say?
Anyway.
No, but it was just where it's a similar effect, because it's not even a question of, because there's 2 issues here, like the ships that travelled by Abu Bakr who went over, if they were never to be heard of again, then it's clearly difficult to say, well, what happened to them and what didn't happen to them, because they didn't report back to anyone to say we done this.
But they didn't report back to West Africa.
Yeah,
that's what
exactly.
It is.
So, but the history of travelling to the Americas far predates that anyway, because we're talking, you know, that was
easily.
we're talking 700-800 years ago that these voyages happened. Where there's evidence, you know, that Nile Valley civilizations, i.e., the Egyptians and Phoenicians and the likes, travelled over there far earlier. You know, for those who don't know, there's a natural current anyway from West Africa that takes you right to the Americas and can take you back again without even having to use sails and rowing and so forth. So.
That's one thing I know a lot about.
Whether that was discovered by accident or someone knew it through astronomy and science and geometry and so forth, you know, that's neither here nor there. The fact remains people had been going there for some time and mixing with the population that were already there and bringing technology and science and learning and so forth. You know, the heads, the Olmec heads from Mexico and places like I think it's Lorenzo and Zapata. Massive heads. They stand. Some of them stand 10 foot tall, 6 foot wide, 6 foot deep. You know, these are ginormous heads, and they actually appear like they are part of a larger statue, although there's never been any evidence of them larger statues being found, but they certainly have the look that they are part of a larger structure, which, given the dimensions of the head, you're talking a massive structure of maybe 100 feet or more. Similar in terms of some of the Colossus statues that were built by the likes of Ramses II or Ramses the Great, as a lot of people know. Similar in size to some of them structures. I'm not talking about the Ramesseum, where the ones are on the outside of the mountain, and one of the ones that is freestanding.
In Luxor, isn't it?
Yeah, they'd be similar in size to them things. So, you know, this is, as I say, such a rich history, because what Runoko done, he goes around the world, and part of his travels included Liverpool, because Liverpool has a great collection of African pieces of artwork and mummies and so forth, and one of the best outside of London, within Britain, if not the best outside of London within Britain when it comes to the Egyptian collections and other parts. And he photographs these images, he puts them in books, he writes about them, he talks about them, he researches them, he adds research to them. He will liaise with the museums themselves to try and influence how these things are explained or depicted in the museums and so forth, because some of them are not labelled properly. And as I said, this is the vast evidence that exists in museums across the world, famous museums like the museum in New York, the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, and the museum in Berlin and Munich. Obviously, London Museum, British Museum, Natural History Museum, and places like that. Liverpool World Museum. Museums all over the world are absolutely full to the brim of black artifacts from many different time periods of many different black cultures and civilizations from within Africa. Including the island of Madagascar.
Like you guys, the things you guys are talking about, these are things that I'd heard before. And this is why this is the only thing where trickle down actually works, because we all know about trickle down economics that supposedly works. Trickle down knowledge is a big thing. Like, I had heard all of the things that you're speaking of, but I'd never really put names to it. I'd heard it from friends of mine who had done extensive studies. I'd heard it from, you know, I'd seen little things here and there, but never really put names to who discovered these things or who really started these studies. So this is why all of this and us doing these types of podcasts is really important, because some people know these things but don't know.
Well, but it's not an educational thing, and that's what I think is important. Is that, like, especially like we did the fatherhood podcast. I mean, it's important for our children to know this kind of stuff. Why is it not available, you know, and everything for people? And that's why it's important.
And that's the thing. I mean, it is available. That's the thing. Well, it's available. It's just a matter of, you know, and then that's the other thing I've always said is, like, we as a people generally, not even just black people, but like we put so much emphasis on what we're being taught without actually thinking, well, actually, maybe we should be teaching our own children these things. It's like we say, oh, the school's not teaching them. So, you know what I mean?
No, that makes sense.
You know what I mean?
Education starts in the house.
Exactly. It's like, you know, there's so many things that I learned from outside of school that have informed the things that they did tell me in school. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, definitely.
So it's like, all of the, theorems and history and all of those types of things. It's as you go back to the fatherhood thing, it's, the same things as I say to my son. It's like, yeah, this is what they're telling you, but here's the other stuff that they're not going to tell you, or they don't have time.
Just to add to that as well, obviously, education does start in the home, but what is an unfortunate reality as well is a lot of parents are not equipped with that knowledge to start that education in the home. Exactly. So it's how do you address that balance? Because the major institutions of the world are run from what we call a Eurocentric point of view.
Exactly.
So Ivan van Sertima himself, when he was the statues that Runoko Rashidi, well, the Almakheds, which he later wrote about himself and studied a lot more. When he first came across them, because they were found, I can't remember the exact year they were found. It might have been in the 30s. The first ones were discovered, but over time, they were discovering more and more. It's not just heads; they were giant, like round stone balls, which were like perfect geometrically, which were created somehow. Some people tried to claim they were natural phenomenon, where others said, well, no, these were clearly sculpted.
I love people who do that. That's the colors that they have to work with.
Ivan van Sertima actually had a battle with certain academic institutions for many years. When before he could actually physically go and see them, because for a long time he was banned from traveling from America under all these communist inquiries and all of this thing, and because he's studying black history, his passport was confiscated, so he was trapped in America. So a lot of his studies he had to do through books and research, and he had a big battle which went on for many years, where eventually images were released. He already had images of the Olmec heads, but the images what he was after was the back of the Olmec heads. And when he got the images of the back of the Olmec heads, they depicted what were clearly braids, plaits, a hairstyle which is significant and identifiable with black culture, with black people. But and this was hidden by the Eurocentric academic world for obvious reasons. They don't want black people to know, for one, and they don't even want white people to know as well. They don't want anybody to know that we have this rich history, because they want to perpetuate the myth that Africa is nothing, it's a dark continent, and it was full of savages until we came along and civilized them.
But in speaking to the fact that some people aren't unequipped for that, I don't think it's just that. I think some people don't know, but some people will seek. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's the important thing. It's that, not saying that you're not equipped to do it. It's just because everybody's equipped to learn something. You know what I mean? Everybody's equipped. And then, go and learn with your children. You know what I mean? Go find these things on your own with your children. If you're that, if you figure it's important. Because that's the other thing, is like, as we live in this capitalist, Eurocentric society, we know that people don't have time. You know what I mean? Time is the number one thing. We have so many people who are out there working 2-3 jobs just to make ends meet. So their children are left. You know what I mean? So, it even when it comes down to technology and things like that, we tell people, oh, don't let your kids be on the iPad all day. It's like, well, how about teaching them how to use the iPad to do other things other than just play games? You see what I'm saying?
No, that's definitely relevant, because what you're talking about, capitalist Eurocentric society, a capitalist Eurocentric society is designed, not just to oppress and suppress the knowledge of black people, but even their own white people. Of everybody. It's designed for that purpose, and what it actually does is it learns people, but educates themselves. And the analogy I always use to make people see this in just basic terms is, to any dog owner or anyone who knows the behavior of a dog, you get a stick, you throw it, the dog will go and get it. You get a stick, you throw it, the dog will go and get it. So you're learning the dog, you're teaching the dog to do that. But if you could actually educate a dog, after you're doing that a couple times, the dog will tell you, get it yourself, it's your turn. That's education. That's the difference between education. Education allowed someone to think and express themselves. When you learn something, you become robotic. And that's what the system does to people. It makes them robotic, where you haven't got the time to learn these things because you've been taught to not even have the desire to want to know these things or to see the importance of it. Because, like the great Marcus Garvey says, a people without the knowledge of the history and culture is like a tree without roots. And again, you take away the roots from a tree, which go back deeper than the tree stands taller, the tree will fall down. And that's the same for the people. If you don't understand the roots, the basis of where they come from, they will keep falling down and they will never be able to stand strong. So,
yeah, well, you know what, with Runoko Rashidi as well, I mean, 125 countries. This man, like, he's the type to do, he's done the work of like 10 scholars or something, you know. It's he just every day posting. This is someone who really dedicated the life, and from primary research, doing it myself, when I went into the Philippines and I witnessed the African presence, ancient black peoples, and I said to them, I've got videos, I said, Jews know Africa. And I asked them that because I went going in on a tour. So the different you do a tour and they know you're coming at 2 o'clock and then they're going to show you how to do this and that. No, I've only done a tour once. I don't do them anymore. So when I've gone in and hired the Jeep, the person driving me said, well, I'm not here to guide you. You're the guide. You do what you do. So when I've asked them about Africa, I just got a shock when they all were aware. And I've got the video, I've sent it, Patrick, you've seen the video anyway, where they're screaming about Africa, and I was like, and then even with the Mani tribe in Thailand, I showed them pictures of other tribes from around the world so they can see the black presence himself, because you don't know when an anthropologist goes into them, maybe, I don't know what they're doing, they just give them the swab and then put their own little stories and stuff. They ignore oral traditions half the time anyway, you know, it's all about science. But the influence, like I say, Runoko actually told me himself, which I was quite surprised. He was surprised I visited the Mani and the Eta in the Philippines and the Oranjasi in Malaysia. And he told me he hasn't done that. And now I was shocked because I said, hold on a second, wait a minute. I was going there because you went there. You know, like, then you found out that, no, he didn't actually go in there. He actually done lectures. It didn't mean he actually went into the area to visit the people. Because these are like 7-hour drives, 8, 9, 10 hours. And that's why, like, on the Zoom, if you watch it back, he's, like, quite surprised at some of the stuff. But he's just the biggest influence, I can actually say he's my biggest influence. I have many influences, Dr. John Henry Clark. I think Dr. John Henry Clark, one of my favourites. Dr. Ben Yosha Ben Yakinen. Now, he's born in Ethiopia, so he understands history a little differently when you're born somewhere, because you can have access to stuff other than other people. Chancellor Williams, like you've saying before, Patrick, about the struggles that Van Serten was having to publish stuff, and the same with our brothers himself, Chancellor Williams, parts when he wanted to go into South Africa, you know, it was like a big thing and all that, you know, or he wanted to go to Sudan, he wanted to go South Sudan. But at the end of the day, you know what? Anyone else got anything else to say anyway? Just
to two really good quotes that I've made a note of from Runoko Rashidi. The first is, history is the light that illuminates the past and the key that unlocks the door to the future. And that's just another way of the Marcus Garvey saying about the tree and its roots and the people knowing the history and culture. Is the same difference. Yeah. Another one which we've just touched on, that what Jay was mentioning before about teaching our children and so forth, which was basically, and it's aimed at, you know, he's talking about black people, black children. The worst crime you can commit is to teach a child that their history began with slavery.
Wow.
You know, and it's true, because the history of slavery, of chattel slavery, that is, European chattel transatlantic slavery, goes back to you know, the 1500s, you know, people put it down to, the 1400s rather, people put it down to Columbus's voyage of so-called discovery in 1492. So that's like a 400, 500 year period we're talking about. Yeah. But you know, I remember going, when I've done workshops with youngsters, you know, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds schools, and I'll pose the question, tell me something about black history. Hands will go up, I'll say yes, and they'll mention the slave trade, or they might mention Martin Luther King. And I say, okay, well, tell me something about black history before the slave trade. You know, I remember a little girl innocently said, oh, well, they captured the slaves and put them on the ship, you know, which is true, because that was just before the slave trade. And I said, well, no, tell me something 500 years or 1,000 years before the slave trade, And every one of them looked at me like I'd suddenly started talking in some ancient and forgotten language, and they couldn't understand a word I was saying, as if to say, well, there's no such thing. That's what the looks expressed to me. Well, what does that even mean?
Can I ask you a question, Patrick? You know when you first see Runoko Rashidi explain about black people in China in ancient times, I don't mean the first people. I'm talking about the civilizations, you know, the Shang dynasty, or even the black presence of these indigenous peoples in Asia. Was you shocked when you first? I mean, I was shocked.
I wasn't shocked simply
First
because
of all, like,
I've read many of Van Sertima's works.
Yeah.
Going back to the 80s.
Yeah.
Some of his early books, and I've read other things from people like Dr. Joseph Ben-Jacquemin, John Hendrik Clark.
Yeah.
And what I wasn't shocked simply because I've, as I said, I've read stuff about people in not just them places, but many places throughout the Indonesian islands.
Yeah.
The Philippine islands and so forth,
Peninsula.
where you're talking about histories that go back where I remember watching a documentary once, and it was showing, well, the only thing that was not shocked, but it was surprising. That the numbers of the people who still actually exist there to this day.
Oh, most
definitely. We're not talking little isolated pockets of a couple dozen here and a couple dozen there. We're talking thousands and thousands of people hidden away from everyday the everyday eye, the everyday viewer. So it's almost as if even people who recognise and accept that these people, these black people existed there at one time, they thought, oh, well, maybe they've all died out or they've moved on and migrated somewhere else. But they're actually hidden communities, hidden nations almost, who were just secluded and isolated and secluded in the poorest parts of them countries. But it's just been, we could go on forever, you know, and obviously I'm aware of time's running short, we have to end this, but just thanks for us being here today. It's been great to be able to discuss Runoko Rashidi. His legend will live on. Just some little bits of information. There is a Facebook page, which I'm sure will carry on in his honour. It's called In the Museums and Galleries of the World, you know, by Runoko Rashidi, that he facilitated, but other admins of that page will surely carry it on, and I'm sure they'll get more traffic now and more interest in just supporting and promoting that, the much needed, very useful, very informative, very educational work that he's done. Rest in peace, Runoko Rashidi.
Hopefully.
It was a pleasure to meet you.
Hopefully he gets more credit now for his work, you know, because it's just difficult trying to feed people African history sometimes. But, you know, we're going to have to end out the show today. We've come to the end of the show, season 3, and with the Black Men's Group. So, you know, we're going to end this out now on Discovering Season 3. I'm your host, James Diboe. And thank you all for coming, Patrick.
Thank you for having us.
Jay Blades.
Good having me.
Thank you.
No problem.